Now, the normal distribution is the most widely used one in statistics. But it's always worth keeping in mind that in fact it doesn't occur that often in the real world, and there are many other distributions. A common mistake is to assume that everything has a normal distribution, and you can get into a lot of trouble by making that. One other distribution looks something like this. There's a probability density, and here's the thing you're trying to measure, and it looks something like this. This is often called a log normal distribution or something similar to that. What it's telling you is the most frequent occurrence is a value of about 0, and the higher the value the less likely, but you can still get extremely high values. Now, one example for this would be how much rain is going to fall tomorrow. In Australia, the most likely amount of rain to fall tomorrow is nothing, up here. There's a reasonable probability of getting a small amount of rain, a small probability of getting a medium amount of rain, and a very small probability of getting a lot of rain. But nonetheless, this tail out here of low values is very important, because every now and then, might be once every 20 or 30 or 100 years, you get a point right out here and you get huge floods. So by and large you either get drought or flood, or something in between. This would be very similar to the probability if you pick a random person from anywhere on Earth, how much money do they have? Most people on Earth are pretty poor. But there are a very small number of people right out in the wings, the Bill Gates of this world, who have an incredible amount of money. And once again, the curve might seem very low down there, but that number of people down there are actually really important because they control something like 2/3 of the world's total wealth. Another type of distribution looks like a normal distribution, a bell curve, but its tails are a little bit higher. So this is what's called a fat-tailed distribution for obvious reasons. So it behaves mostly like the normal distribution, but extreme events, say out here and out here, are more likely. This is probably the most common sort of probability distribution in the real world. So it's more or less like a normal distribution, the bell curve, but with extreme events more likely than the bell curve would predict. So, for example, if you want to look at how much money you're going to make by investing in banks next year, that curve will look like a normal distribution. The banks usually make a small amount of money each year, but it has a fat tail going down to extremely negative values. So what that means is that most years the banks will make you 5 or 10% profits, but then occasionally, maybe one year in 20 or 30, they will lose 1,000%. Now you might think you could ignore this tail down here because it's very, very low, but that would be a mistake. For example, after the global financial crisis in 2008, many banks lost so much money that actually was more than all the profits they'd made in the previous 100 years, in fact, since they were founded. So if you had to ask the question, do banks on average make money? Most years they do, but every now and then they wipe out so much money that it cancels out everything. The only reason that it's worth investing in banks is because you hope the governments will come and bail them out when they make those enormous losses. So these fat tails can be very important. Likewise, this tail over here is what allows for floods. This is something that often climate modellers forget. They tend to predict the amount of rain you're going to get in a river as a bell curve, but in fact it might be a bell curve with a fat tail, which means you might get enormous floods every now and then. And these enormous floods, we often hear this is a 1 in 1,000 year flood, but 1 in 1,000 year floods seem to happen every 10 years or so, and that's telling us that in fact the curve is rather higher than a normal distribution in the wings. Anyway, bear in mind, not all distributions are normal. In fact, most of them are not, and these little tails and funny extensions and things off to the side can be really important.